Directors Budget Workshop to order. Ms. Christine.
Thank you. Once again, new pages have been provided for your budget book. Staff increased salaries and wages for the board, $6,000 to accommodate the retirement for Mayor Turner per state statute. Picking up where we left off, it was solid waste. Revenue begins on page 62. Revenue is expected to increase about 3% or $88,000. Utility sales are based on trend and growth. Sales are expected to increase $150,000. Transfer station fees are down by about $30,000 over the prior year budget based on trend, and recycling fees are also expected to decrease by $25,000. Expenditures begin on page 63. The personnel increase of 3% is due to the proposed 2% raise and healthcare increases. There are no changes to the personnel schedule on page 65. Operations increased by $32,000. Administrative department charges increased by $20,000. Property insurance increased by almost $9,000. Vehicle and equipment maintenance will increase $15,000 based on the increased number of trips to the dealer for repairs. Landfill fees will decrease $10,000 based on trend. And the ADEQ solid waste district fee did not increase as expected. I believe when we did that budget last year, we were in the middle of a lawsuit, and the fees are budgeted for next year $7,500 lower. Transfers increased $37,000 based on policy. Capital outlay on page 64 will decrease by $1.1 million. Several large pieces of equipment were purchased last year, including a side-load trash truck for $296,000, a brush and tree grinder for $680,000, and a rear-load trash truck for $235,000. Current year capital includes a front-end loader for $175,000. Airport revenue begins on page 66. Revenue is expected to decrease $485,000. Prior year included a grant for $377,000. It is important to note that we do not include any grant income until the grants are approved. And fuel sales are expected to decrease by $115,000 based on trend, which has been impacted by COVID-19. Expenditures on page 67. There's a personnel decrease of 13%. Rather than replace the airport manager with a full-time position, that position will be overseen by the community services manager, whose salary will be split between the airport and community development's animal control. These changes are reflected in the personnel schedule on page 69. Fuel purchases decreased $50,000 based on trend. Administrative department charges increased by $5,300. Ground and building maintenance increased by $5,300. There are some hangar doors that need to be serviced. Estimated depreciation decreased $10,000, and this again is based on new assets placed in service versus those that are no longer depreciating. Overall, operations decreased $81,000 or 9%. Capital is on page 68, and there's no capital for 2021. Street fund revenue begins on page 70. Overall revenues will decrease 7%, mainly due to a reduction in government grants of $500,000. Other changes include property tax, which is up 6% or $26,000. Sales tax is up $144,000 or 9%. Street development fees are up $37,500 based on trend. State aid is up almost $48,000 based on trend. And the general fund is transferring $262,000 for Simon Sager Avenue Phase 4, which is the final phase.
Christine,
Yes.
what are included in street development fees?
I'm gonna have to ask.
So the street development fee, if you remember earlier this year, we made a change to the master street plan and we revised the street fees.
Okay,
So historically, we had some calculation that only certain developments paid it. And we ended up doing the research and basically created an impact fee for streets.
okay,
And they're applied now to every dwelling, every new commercial, and every new industrial building.
thank you.
And can I ask why the reduction in government grants? Is that just like a one-time grant that we had? Okay.
Yes. And we don't budget, even if we have one in the pipeline, until it's approved, we don't budget for it. Expenditures begin on page 71. Personnel costs increase due to proposed raises, healthcare cost increases, and benefit election changes. There are no changes to the personnel schedule on page 74. Operations increased 5%. Administrative department charges increased $13,000. Vehicle and equipment maintenance is up $5,000 based on trend. Construction billing department is up $30,000 based on trend, and this is the labor that is charged to the infrastructure fund for labor related to sidewalks. Typically, it's sidewalk repairs. I won't say it's always that. Contracted snow removal was not budgeted based on trend. Page 72 begins capital projects. And the major capital projects include $449,000 for a sidewalk from Washington to Lake Francis and east to the tracks. This is a grant-funded project. Simon Sager Phase 4 for $525,000. Again, this is the remaining distance to Tahlequah. We will complete the Kenwood rebuild from Highway 59 to Highway 412 for $606,000. Villa View will be rebuilt from Sycamore Heights to State Line Road. Brentwood Drainage Project for $200,000. Capital assets on page 73 include the purchase of a dozer for $210,000 and a sheep's foot soil compactor for $147,000. Are there any other questions related to that fund? Okay. The last fund is the Internal Service Fund's Healthcare Fund. Revenue begins on page 74. This is the first year for this. And revenues are made up of employee contributions and city contributions made based on positions, whatever we've budgeted for positions, and interest income. Expenditures are on page 75. And all expenses are for either healthcare claims, Reinsurance premiums, which is an insurance that limits the city's liability for individuals with excessive care costs. And plan administration costs. Are there any questions?
Christina,
Yes.
were there just, one page, was there just one page front back?
Yes.
Okay, so it's page 75 and 76.
Ah. Apologize.
Marla, can you pull your mic down?
Sorry. Because 74 was in the personnel schedule. So, okay,
That's correct.
good. I just didn't want to be missing anything.
Nope.
Sorry, Renee.
And I would like to recap from the overall budget. There's a slide on the overhead screens which show the projected ending cash balance for certain accounts. The overall unrestricted cash will increase by almost $3.3 million. Approximately $1 million of that will come from repayment of loans from public safety funds for the Fire Station 2 and for the A-Winds project. And the remaining increase is net income based on budget. Restricted funds will increase $1.3 million. This is due mainly to the accumulation of the 5/8 cent sales tax for the water plant improvements. And overall cash on hand at the end of 2021 will exceed $47 million. Are there any questions at all related to the budget or anything?
Did you send us that?
I believe that was sent in the PowerPoint.
That was in the original PowerPoint in the first workshop.
Months ago.
Yes.
A month ago, yes.
A month ago.
Thank you.
So at the next board meeting, we will be presenting the budget, requesting approval. Along with that, we will be presenting some minor changes to the overall compensation plan. Most of that is renaming positions based on, you saw some of the changes that Christina talked about here, not changing the pay scale, but just renaming those positions. But we'll walk you through that too in 2 weeks. But that's the next step in this process.
I do have a couple of questions, and they are going back to some of what we've talked about before. So if you answered these already, if we talked about it, pardon me. So on page 6, administration capital outlay, just have a couple of, well, there's pages 5 and 6, a couple of questions. I noticed that new for 2021 on page 5 under expenses are $33,500 for city events and $46,000 for economic development marketing. So we may have talked about this. Can you tell me a little bit, or can you remind me?
Yes.
That is related to the position. That is actually the public information officer's budget line items. You'll actually, if you look in the community development fund, you'll see those lines are zeroed out for this year, and basically we just moved them over to the administration.
Okay,
Position will move under Philip.
Okay, so that's the budget for that position, not necessarily the salary, that's
Right, no, this
for
is,
budget for Mark, okay.
right.
Okay.
We just took the budget from community development and moved it to admin. I'm moving
Okay.
on into admin from community.
I think I remember you saying that, but I need that reminder, so thank you. Still a little stuck on spending $18,000 for grapes, but I know we'll talk about that later. Under page 6, boardroom grapes, but that'll
Let's talk about it now.
You want to talk about
Got
it
a
now?
little time. I don't want to be a burden on you.
No, we're not voting on it yet, right? That'll come when you
No,
get
but
bids.
you can talk about it now. Obviously, you have 15 more minutes.
Well, and then let me ask these other 2 questions real quick. The Sager Creek mitigation for $330,000 and the Main Street design for $286,000. Those are the total costs, but we're getting grants for parts of both of those, right?
That is correct.
So the Main Street is 50-50 basically.
Yes.
And And I don't remember, Don, do you remember what the,
2/3, 1/3?
I think it was 2/3, 1/3?
I think I think it was. So we're not actually gonna spend this much, but we're gonna get reimbursed for some of that, yeah.
And as it relates to the drapes, it's the board's decision. These drapes have been here since day one. They really need to be cleaned. We had an individual to come in and kind of give us some idea about cleaning them, and the idea was it would be better just to replace them. So the ballpark number is 16. I think we can do it for that. But if the board doesn't want to, the two things I think that this building needs that hasn't been done since it's been built is replacing the drapes, and it's likely in the next year, not in 2021, but in 2022 or 2023, to replace the carpet on the first floor. And so in this case, we were looking at trying to do both, but I didn't think we could get them into the budget. And the idea was, let's try to do the drapes this year, maybe next year, 2022, replace the carpet.
And you're gonna hear me say this again probably later tonight, but just considering the times we're in right now, I think it's a good time to maybe table some things that may not necessarily have to be done. While I appreciate the intention of it, I don't know that it has to be done at this point. But that's my personal opinion, so I'm okay either way, but I'm just putting that out there. Thank you. But thank you for thinking of it.
Any other questions?
No other questions? All right, you are completed. All right, we'll call this in adjournment then, and we'll be back at 6:30. I wish to call to order the Siloam Springs Board of Directors meeting for this Tuesday, November the 3rd, 2020. Roll call.
Atkinson? Here. Wiley? Here. Burns?
Here.
Hunt?
Here.
Rissler? Here. Coleman?
Here.
Carroll?
Here. If you would please stand as Director Hunt lead us in prayer, and then we'll have a pledge of allegiance.
I was listening to KLRC today, and the announcer read this prayer by A.E. Graham, so I'm going to read this tonight. Almighty God, who has given us an abundance of good things, has set our feet about these boundary shores and has called us to give an account for the work of our hands. We ask your blessings upon this election day. Give hope to us, O Lord, that these days are not unknown to you. As we powerfully proclaim that you are not a God of darkness and chaos, let us with steadfast hearts participate in this beautiful exercise of democracy. Give love to us, O Lord, as we deepen our need to love one another, even those who do not think, speak, and vote like us. Remind us that you, not our candidates, are the fount of all holiness. Let us recall with humility our own sins as we remember that all are welcome at your table. Open our hearts as we pray for those who will direct this country. Give courage to us. Give mercy, O Lord, to lose with dignity and win with compassion, remembering that all those in the ballot were made in your image. Lord, hear the prayers of those gathered in voting booths, precincts, and campaign rallies, and those huddled around computer screens. Hear the prayers of your children who raise their hands with confidence, just as you continue to hear the prayers of those whose hands will always tremble in silence. See in us, Holy Father, what you love in your Son, as we offer great thanks that our citizenship in heaven will never rest upon our political allegiances, but on the sacrifice of the cross. Remind us of the promise of your salvation you bestow upon us land your protection and guidance. We continue this day and every day to shelter and bless this country we love. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I wish to ask everyone that if you have an electronic device, if you would turn it to silent. And at this time, we have our public input. If you have something that you would like to speak to the board concerning that is not on our regularly scheduled item, even if it's on the consent agenda, if you wish to say something, this will be your time. You would give your name and your address.
My name is James McWhirter. I live at 412 West University Street. I have a couple of things I want to bring up. First is those stoplights at the intersections of 412 and Holly, 412 and Carl, and 412 and Mount Holly. All directions have turn lanes except for Holly turning to the east. I don't understand why left-handers can't turn at the same time and then through traffic go after that. You can sit at that light if you're turning off Holly on 412 for 8.5 minutes. And I haven't timed the other two, but I don't understand why one way goes, other way goes, and it's just causing pollution for our city. And cars sitting and idling at a stoplight isn't good. And my next thing I have is, I want to know when West University became a drag strip in this town. Last Saturday night, they had a cruise night, and it seemed like everybody's spinning tires and racing east and west and not paying attention to a lot of things that they're doing. We have a lot of people that walk up and down that street, dogs, and little kids, and JVU students and all this, and to me it's a little bit overwhelming. And I myself, I've been into hot rod, street rods and that kind of stuff over the years, and I called the police department Saturday night and asked them if they would do something about it. She said, the dispatcher said, well, it's cruise night, and they've set up a cruise night, so unless you want an officer to come by your house, we aren't going to come by. And I thought, okay. So this evening when I was waiting for my wife to get home from work, looking out the kitchen window, which looks to the north, a little white Chevy pickup comes burning across the low water bridge, stops, waits for a car, and after the car leaves, he's going west as hard as it can go. And I don't know, I just don't understand why this is tolerated. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anyone else from the public that would like to address? We'll give your name and address, and please limit to 3 minutes. Thanks, bro.
Larry Kenwood, 207 Western Hills Drive.
Could we pull that mic down, please?
How's that? Board members and Mr. Patterson. Myself and other citizens have a question and a concern. That is the agenda. Who sets the agenda? Who changes the agenda for these meetings? Last week, the agenda had items that have since today have been changed to the consent agenda. Do you not realize that citizens like me determine from looking at that agenda if and when they will come and let you know their thoughts? My question is, since I've acquired data from FOIA, from this board and city employees, it shows that Mr. Patterson and Mr. Turner are talking about pre-agenda meetings on Teams. I don't know if the rest of you are involved in it. I haven't found any in your emails. If that is true, who's setting the agenda or changing the agenda? I'll leave that to this board to decide. Remember, you represent the citizens of Siloam Springs.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Jeff Palmer. I live at 21923 Davidson Road in Siloam Springs, just north of the new annexation. The resolution's 5020, and I just would like to give a little clarification on a few things. Is this the time I should ask that, or should I wait?
You can ask it, it may be answered in a later moment.
I want to find out what's going to happen with the existing fence lines on the north side of this annexation. Is there any kind of privacy fences there on the north side of the new development? And the drainage that comes to the north towards me, wanted to see if there was anything, any kind of retention ponds or any kind of thing street lights that might encroach in over on our property, or is it going to be something that's going to be a little bit more private or whatever? To just light up that area that needs to be lit up. And that's what my concerns are.
Thank you, Jeff. Do we have any others? All right, having none, we will go into our consent agenda. And we have items A through F, which I will read. Then we'll ask the board's pleasure on if we'd like to pull some of those or if we wish to take vote on as they are. Item A, we have our budget workshop minutes from October 20th. We also have the regular minutes from October 20th. We have item C, dedication of utility easements at 1400 Highway 412 East. Item D, we have a contract rate study, Public Works and Electric Departments, 1898 and Company in the amount of $120,500. Item E, we have a resolution 50-20, the preliminary plat development permit for Mission Hill Addition at 14505 North Country Club Road. Item F, we have a resolution 51-20, special event permit for the annual Turkey Trot 5K. Board, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Vice Mayor, I'd like to pull items D and E.
Okay, items D and E will be pulled from consent agenda, and they will be immediately looked at as soon as we complete the consent agenda. Is there anything else? If nothing else on that, I'd ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Smiley?
Yes.
Burns?
Yes.
Hunt?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Coleman?
Yes.
Carroll?
Yes.
Sappington?
Yes.
Right. We will, since item D was pulled from the consent agenda, it deals with the contract rate study with Public Works and Electric Departments, 1898 and Company, in the amount of $120,500. Looks like Steve will be coming up to speak with us concerning that to clarify.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the board. Steve Gorzek, Public Works Director. You have the memo in your board packet, and I'm going to just touch on some of the highlights of it and maybe expand on a couple of those items. First of all, I had mentioned that the formal rate study for water, sewer, solid waste, and electric had not been done in at least 7 years. And the reason I put that was because I've been here 7 years. So there hasn't been one since I've been here. In talking with staff, though, that have been here much longer than I, it sounds like there hasn't been one done in that period of time either. So basically, it's been quite a while. Don't know exactly when, but it's been a long time. I mentioned the rate study was, well, let me back up a little bit. The purpose of the study was to determine if revenues are sufficient to cover what I call cost of service, which is the operations and capital expenses. The rate study hadn't been considered in the past because transfers to the general fund from enterprise funds had not been had varied. We didn't have the same amount that got transferred from one year to the other. Now in 2018, in the summer of 2018, the 2019 and 2020 board goals were put together, and when that was done, one of the things that was in those board goals was to adopt a fiscal, or develop a fiscal plan that would establish specific amounts of transfers from the enterprise funds to the general fund. And when I'm talking about enterprise funds, I'm talking about all the utility funds, so water, sewer, solid waste, and electric. Which I think is a great thing, because just like all other expenditures that we budget for, we now know how much is going to be transferred from the enterprise funds to the general fund. So now we have a dollar amount that we know at the very end how much we're going to be spending. But having done that, that would now lead us to a rate study, because now that we have known expenditures and we know what we project what our revenues are going to be, the next logical step would be to have the rate study. And in doing so, we started this process back in March. A request for qualifications was sent out to 6 consulting firms, and we advertised it in the paper. So it's similar to going out for bid, but not exactly the same, because the difference would be, number one, for a request for qualifications, you don't ask for a dollar amount. You're basing your selection on how qualified the firms would be for the specific task at hand, which would be studying our rates and what we need to do with those. The other thing is, with bids, you don't form a committee to select which contractor you're going to hire. In the case of qualifications, we had a 6-member committee that was comprised of staff that's directly involved with these 4 utilities. And in that process, with those 4 that did submit their qualifications, 2 backed out. The unanimous decision, and we did this by a virtual meeting, I think it was Teams that we did. But nevertheless, the ultimate decision and unanimous decision was for 1898 and Company. These guys are very, very good at what they do, and that's all they do. They do rate studies. They don't do any kind of engineering or anything like that, just specifically rate studies. One thing I want to point out with 1898 and Company, because we have 4 different utilities, there will be 3 individuals who will be working on this project if it's approved. One specializes just in water and sewer rates. One specializes just in solid waste, and the third specializes just in electric. So we will get a very good result, I think, out of this. Now, it's going to be a very comprehensive plan as well. They're going to ask for a lot of information, and they will take all that information and put it together. And when all is said and done, there's going to be, or at least in the scope of work, there would be a board workshop sometime late spring, early summer, because we're anticipating that this project wouldn't be complete until June of 2021. So we would have a board workshop. The company would go through and explain what they did and how they arrived at what they did, and we'll even have recommendations. Any recommendations, however, that are made by the consultant is obviously will have to be brought to the board for approval. And those recommendations would be presented at the workshop. And as far as the fiscal impact, we had collectively $92,000 budgeted. The study came in at $120,500. The additional $28,500 that we needed will come from basically savings on a wastewater project, which is called the final splitter motorized valve and operator. It's gates to close off flow to go into a couple of the tanks at the wastewater plant. But it came in considerably under what we had budgeted, so we were able to take the savings for that. And with that, I believe staff is available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from the public?
If you have money from the wastewater.
If you would please come up and give your name and address, please.
James DeBrook, Fort Wayne West University. If you have money that you didn't use in the wastewater area, what he said about the new gate or whatever it was, why don't we just leave that money where it is and use it down the road for wastewater projects and needs in that department instead of, I feel like you're robbing from one to, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I don't think you've taken $20-some thousand and added to it, or 32, whatever it is, to add to another project. I don't think that should be done that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Larry Kenwood, 207 Western Hills Drive. Board members, after reviewing the November 3rd, 2020 agenda and prior discussions about utility rates and/or rate increases, I'd like to address a number of issues and my observations. First, research shows that this board has agreed that the city has a firm contract with GARDA for the rate we pay for electricity through 2040. Second, through FOIA requests and records obtained, it's evident that the city is adding hundreds of new utility users every year. And that research shows that the City Board and Planning Commission have been complicit in the fact that the lot size and number of homes have decreased, therefore allowing for increased numbers of homes, tax-paying utility users, therefore increasing the city income from utilities. Third, you're now at a point in time of developing a financial plan for utilities. Sadly, making that concession points out that the years of board service by some board members has been a waste of taxpayer funds. How can this board sit there with a straight face and tell the city that they are funding 60% of your projects from the utility taxes, and you're just now coming up with a financial plan for the utilities? Fourth, how could you need a rate study if you've been increasing rates every year since 2013? Obviously, this board has been remiss in its duties for the citizens if it does not know from reading the city financial statements that the fees paid by us citizens is covering the cost of services. But let's make it clear. Either you, the board, think the citizens are dumb or have failed in their fiscal duties under the Arkansas statute. That is, you're making a profit and you've admitted 60% of your operating budget comes from the profit from the utilities. And quit using the scare tactics some of you board members have been floating around about our insurance rate could go up, we could lose firemen and police officers. It boils down to fiscal responsibility, something that this board seems to lack. And lastly, I'd like to address an issue that he brought up. There's a website that anybody can go to and it shows the rates all across Arkansas that everybody charges, and you're going to find that our little city of Siloam Springs is 10, 11 to 27% higher than Fayetteville, Rogers, and Bentonville.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jan McWhirter. I live at 412 West University. I don't have any numbers, I don't have any stats or anything, but I want to say there are a lot of people that are having a hard time paying the bills. And for this to go up and to spend $120,000 to decide how much or where it needs to go up, I think that really needs to have some more consideration and take some advice from some people that don't have the money to pay their utilities now. Why raise them? This gentleman just said how much higher we are than any other town, and we are, I do know that. I just think it's a asinine move, and I think y'all all away. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. No other comments from the public?
David Allen, 1600 Bellevue Drive. Thank you, Jan, for coming up. I do have some numbers. Compared to the 4 other largest cities in the Northwest Arkansas area, Siloam Springs is by far the highest per kilowatt hour on rates of electric. We used to be the lowest, and we used to be one of the lowest in the state, and it was because we owned our own electric company. But as of now, comparative to Fayetteville, Rogers, Springdale, which are actually all the same rates, Siloam Springs is 14% higher. Ours is 9.43, theirs is 8.26. We're 2.6% higher than Bentonville, which is at 9.19. The most frustrating, though, is the industrial and commercial. Siloam Springs is by far the highest at 655 for industrial, which is 24% higher than the Fayetteville, Rogers, Springdale, and 18.4% higher than Bentonville. The commercial rate is 922, which is 27% higher than Fayetteville, Rogers, and Springdale, and nearly the same higher than Bentonville. These rates have all gone up in the last 8 years, along with the other utilities that we pay. What is most frustrating is the amount of people that are on fixed income and blue-collar jobs that are suddenly out of work now with COVID. And we're talking about raising rates of utilities. I mean, when is enough enough, folks? When is enough enough? This board has raised the rates of every resident in this city to the point that many are unable to have any extracurricular income because half of their monthly bills go to the city of Siloam Springs. This is uncalled for. It is unconscionable. It is so frustrating to see that we're going to spend $120,000 to study if we should raise rates. Are you kidding me? What is the profit margin for this company? 80% on that? And don't tell me that this company is only doing rate surveys. That is wrong. That is false. They are an engineering company. They are owned by a large engineering company, Burns & McDonnell, out of Kansas City. 1898, all you got to do is look them up. They do more than just rate surveys. But why not bid this out? If you want to do it, bid it out. You can say, oh, it's a professional service, we don't have to bid it out. Folks, just because you don't have to do something doesn't mean you shouldn't do something. It is infuriating to see how many things that the city spends money on in the last several years that aren't even bid out at all.
David, if you could wrap it up, please.
That's it. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? If none, I'll pass it on to the board.
Mr. Vice Mayor,
Yes.
since I am the one that called for this to be pulled, I have some thoughts towards it. It was mentioned that the board goal was to have a rate study done. No, the board goal was for staff to look at it, not for us to pay someone to do it. Where I work, I see people that are experiencing the inability to pay bills. I see some of them with $1,000 where their bills have gone for 3 months. And then we decide all of a sudden, pay it all or you're done. We're gonna have to get a hold of that. I don't know who, but I see this in my work every day and I see the devastation. It is. Families think that they're loping along okay, and then all of a sudden, we pull their meter. I know we use the funds for things that we need, but how bad do we need them? If we can see the money going in and the money going out, surely we can tell if we're doing a good enough rate return. I don't understand why we can't see that. We discussed rates when we did the workshops on solar panels. We knew then what it cost and what we were making and what we needed to charge them and everything. That number hasn't changed, and we should be able to apply that to this right here. $120,000 is a lot of money. Just because the money was budgeted doesn't mean it has to be spent. I am one for looking at this year as a learning to see that you don't beg and borrow from another pot to pay for something you want over here. That's got to stop. And I don't agree with it. I think if it was meant for that, it pays for that. If we can't get that, then it goes back to where it came from. We're not going to hop it over here. It makes the money flow hard to trace. If you're borrowing from one fund and putting it in another fund, and then it doesn't all get spent there, well, let's take it and put it over here. If it's going here, if it's not spent there, it needs to go back where it originated. And you can borrow from the original spot. You're not going to take it and apply it to something else. And we've got to quit doing that. And I think that I better quit speaking. But that's what I feel.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, Director Burns.
I also asked you to pull it, but I thank Director Sappington for pulling that one. I received a couple of emails, and one I directed to Director Risler because it was not in my ward. But I guess I'm on the other end of that fence because I'm curious if Christina can answer that. Does it make it difficult for you to do the finances?
Christina Patricia's Finance Director. No, it doesn't. Actually, all of the utilities at the end of the year roll into the utility fund. So they're actually all part of one fund.
Thank you. So, I know it's election time and everybody's a little emotional, a little high-strung. I went to a website and the website said the earth was flat. And I read the article. I disagree with the article. So there we are. We set goals to be proactive. Some things that have happened in the past left us short. There's nothing here about raising taxes or utilities or any of that. It is a study. And the reason I wanted to pull it is I wanted to remind the public is being proactive is the way we look at ways, and we have to look as a board and how do we reduce. So my end game is to reduce utilities and reduce taxes. And if we're so emotional about this item, then when we bring to the board, and I'll speak directly of me, entertainment districts, tourism dollars, creating revenue streams outside of the box in Siloam Springs, so that when a study gets done and we look 5 or 10 years down the road, how can we reduce that? During a COVID-19, everybody's a little stressed. Everybody's a little stressed out. It is hard times in Ridgemont High for everybody. Schools are closing because guess what? It's going to go away, but it's not going away. It's still here. We can't stop functioning as a city out of fear That's just not the reality of life. The reality is we have a responsibility. We have budgeted items, we have an educated staff. It clearly is stated that what has just been stated by citizens and a board member is incorrect. We're getting a little high-strung. We have to do the studies, we have to look at that, we have to reassure the citizens the end game is to prepare for the future and to put things in place, elements in place that we have at our very fingertips right now so that we can decrease our revenue basis when it comes to taxes and when it comes to utility rates. But it is clearly a study. That is what it is. It is called being proactive. It is called being responsible. And that's the end of my 3 cents. Thank you.
Yes.
First, I want to say thank you to Laura McFarland, Kathy Lehman, and Rebecca, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, for emailing about this. I appreciate that the public is coming out and speaking up about this. I love to see people participate in our local government, and I'm going to take my mask off here. So there's a couple questions I'm going to ask, and I don't know if it's for Christina, Steve, or Philip. But first, there's a few comments I want to make. Steve said in 2018, the summer of 2018, the board goals were set. There's 3 members of this board that were not here in 2018 that defined that goal. And the first paragraph says it is to determine an increase. So you say that it doesn't say that we're doing it, but the memo says it's to determine if there's an increase. So that does set people's emotions off. And that has to be understandable. And staff. I appreciate all the hard work that staff puts in to bring something to the council meetings. I have been exactly where you're at. I served the city of Siloam and I served the city of Fayetteville. And not every one of my agenda items made it through. Not every one of my agenda items were popular. But that doesn't mean that we don't value who you are as an employee of the city. So please, anytime anything's questioned, remember that. It's very important that you remember that. It takes a servant's heart to serve, to work for a municipality. And so please always remember that. I would like to know, these are my 2 questions. How do we go from the lowest utilities in the state to the highest in such a fast time? And the email, I don't know if you guys got the email from Kathy Lehman, but we heard multiple individuals speak about the difference that we pay compared to Fayetteville and compared to Springdale and compared to Rogers and Bentonville. Can somebody speak on what the difference is? Why is there such a huge difference?
I can't speak to why there's such a huge difference. I haven't studied the full utility bill. Obviously, we have a number of utilities on a single bill. I don't know that they have the same utilities in Fayetteville and Rogers and Bentonville on the same bill because we have our own solid waste department. So I don't know if we're speaking apples to apples or apples to oranges. But I can tell you, and Christina and Steve can maybe speak to it better than I can. Before 2015, I think it was either in 2013 or 2014, the city adopted a policy that the rates would increase annually per CPI. So I don't know what the rates were in 2013, but they have slowly crept up over time. The idea of the rate study, it may show that there needs to be a rate increase. It may show that there doesn't need to be a rate increase. It may show that as those rates have slowly crept up per CPI, that there's not a need for an increase for a few years. I don't know that. I don't know what it was before I arrived. I know that, and Steve made this mention, and in 2018 and even before then, part of the issue, in my opinion, has been that the city has relied on the transfer from the utility fund to cover some of the general fund costs. If, as a city, that we are charged to try to operate those enterprise funds as a business, how do we do that if we're not certain from year to year how much is gonna transfer? And when I arrived here in 2015, that's what I saw. I saw the inability to be able to look into the future because there wasn't any fiscal policy about the transfer. So in 2018, when that board was looking at 2019 and 2020 goals, one of the things that we had discussed in general terms was creating some fiscal policies limiting that amount of transfer for the single purpose of being able to now look at the business accounts to try to understand, okay, if my, and I'm gonna use it sort of let's say I'm a fast food restaurant that has a franchise. If I don't know what my franchise fee that I'm gonna have to pay to the national corporation is from year to year, how do I know how much to charge for a hamburger from year to year? If I know what that transfer is gonna be, then I can start looking at and basing my decisions based on what those fees are gonna be for the services that are charged. You're correct in that the memo stated to determine if revenues are sufficient to cover the cost of service, to determine if an increase should be considered. But it's just a study. It was never intended to say it's a guarantee that we're gonna go one way or the other. It was just a study. I haven't seen a study since I've been here. I haven't found a prior study of rates. And so the idea originally in that whole process about that fiscal, the 2019, we had a workshop, and you ultimately adopted, this board ultimately adopted those fiscal policies. And that set a limit on the amount of transfer. And so then that gives the utility funds, at least now, an idea of, we know how much we're gonna have to transfer over to the general fund. So are the rates taking us to where we need to be? What are gonna be the needs as this city grows over the next 5 to 10 years? As we grow that, are the current rates gonna be sufficient to meet that need? I can't answer that. So I don't know if that answers 100% of your question, Stephen, and Christina might answer the rest if I didn't answer it, but that's how we got to where we are.
I did have a few more questions that popped in my head. My concern is, this year has been a difficult year. Yes, our taxes are great. Siloam has been very fortunate. There's a lot of people that live in our community that do not work in our community that have been affected by COVID. And fortunate for most of us on the board, we're able to pay our bills, but not everybody in our community are able to pay our bills. And because that memo did say an increase, that does affect a lot of people. The first thing you think of is, what about those people? Are we leaving them behind? We talk about we want to bring low-income housing and more affordable housing to our community, but what happens if they come here and can't even pay their utility bills? We gotta balance it somewhere for everybody. And so I'm concerned about moving forward, even though it's a budgeted item, and like Marla said, I agree with this statement, doesn't mean you have to spend the money. Should we move it down the road a year or two when everything's more settled and COVID's not in the air and people are still trying to figure out how am I gonna pay my monthly bills? And we're saying, okay, we're gonna use your taxes to do a rate study that possibly will increase your utilities. I think that we need to take that into consideration when we are approaching this, that is this the right time? And so.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, Director Burns.
I would just encourage us to remember a couple of things. For those of us that were on the board underneath the last administrator, Mr. Cameron had mentioned we need to be more businesslike. That was one of his last parting statements. For the three of us here that might remember that. And then we've gone to this process, and we've gone through multiple board members. In fact, we clearly stated respecting, as you come on the board, respecting the goals and going forward and things of that nature. And I think we've done an excellent job at that. And I think this one here, it raised a little concern. As a board member, my job is to reassure the citizen that contact me is that I will do everything within my power to have this conversation that we're having right now. And I am behind the rate study. And then we need to look at what can we do if it shows that in 5 years from now, we need to go up in 10 years from now, or we're gonna cap it, or there is, because our sales tax increasing, there is a possibility going into next year's budget that we can look at lowering it. We have to have something to go with. It is a tool in our toolbox. And to reassure the citizens is the positive thing to do. But to set and go into this motion, it seems to be a new movement out there that we raise our voice and get hysterical that it's the end of the world and Siloam's going to raise taxes is not true. We have a job to do. We're going to have to stay with the budget as we go through this year and into next year because COVID's not over. All right, COVID is not over. We're not out of the woods. We're going to be wearing these masks. The cold weather's setting in. There are things you got to do as a citizen to stay strong. There are people in my ward that have major utility issues. The city's aware of that. We had workshops about being proactive, about delaying payments, about shut-off notices, about working with people. We've had these conversations. The city administrator and this board have all agreed that we're sensitive towards that and we will work with our fellow citizens. And so this is part of working with that. Finding out where we're going, taking us to the future, and not getting caught up in the moment. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Director Hunt.
Thank you. As Director Risser said, I too appreciate the work that the staff has done on all that you bring to us. And I know sometimes it's discouraging to hear feedback, but take it as just that. It's just feedback, questions, but we do appreciate what you do. We do have a responsibility, as Director Burns said, we have a responsibility to the city. We have a responsibility to the citizens. This is one that I would have taken off the consent agenda if it already hadn't been taken off myself. I do want to ask a question before I read some statements that I put together. A comment was made that we've raised our utility rates every year. When was the last time there was a rate increase?
There, and Christina can confirm it, but there is a
Incremental?
an incremental increase annually per CPI.
Okay.
Christina?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there a percentage of that?
It's the consumer price index.
Okay. Okay. Now for my statements. I understand that we've been discussing a rate study for quite some time and that it was presented in the 2020 budget, which we did approve. As a newer board member at the time, that was the first budget process I had been through. So I can pretty safely say I was a bit overwhelmed and probably didn't quite understand what a rate study involved, and that is on me. That's my mistake. The rate study in and of itself isn't as much of a concern to me as is the timing of it, as well as the perception that people have that it will raise utility rates. And I do think that is a very real perception people have right now, whether it ends up raising rates or not, the perception is that it will. When we initially talked about spending the money to do a study, we weren't in the middle of a pandemic that will take a long time for many people to recover from. Because this is an issue that would impact all citizens, I did reach out to a few and ask what they felt like the implications of such a study would be. Tried not to lead them one way or the other, just said, when you hear that the city is wanting to do a utility rate study, what to you are the implications of that? A few responded by saying they thought it meant an increase automatically, like I mentioned with the perception. A couple said they understand it's necessary, that we are a business and should operate like a business, and we need to do something like that. A few felt uncomfortable with the city spending $120,000 at this time. They also posed a few questions. One was, could we do our own study? Even had a professor at JBU say, hey, I could do a study like that. Now, I know we probably wouldn't go there, but the question was, right, could the staff or could we do a study that might not cost quite as much? Could the study result in a rate decrease? And I think you've kind of covered that. I've not really heard decrease, but I've heard it might not result in an increase. I guess potentially it could be anyway. That was a question that was posed. Could it result in a decrease if it shows that costs are being met and there's an overage? According to budget info, the number of utility customers has trended upward since 2012. And since January, we've approved numerous new housing developments that will provide hundreds of new single-family homes, duplexes, and apartments. If we continue to grow at the rate we expect to grow and therefore fill those units, that alone will be a significant increase to our utility revenue. With the pandemic and everything else happening right now, I prefer putting the rate study on hold, at least for now.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yes, Director Smiley.
I too do not understand where all of this came from, that this was actually going to be a rate increase. It's been screamed everywhere that we are raising the rates. Don't let the board tell you they're not. It's a lie. That's what they've been saying. You can see it anywhere. And I am very sensitive to our citizens and their financial struggles, because this is a very delicate time. I do think a rate study shows that we are working to be a business. All businesses do studies. Whatever their product is, that's what they do. We've all got the same emails, I think, from the same people, asking the question, why is it costing so much money? And why can't it be done in staff? And I guess I would like to know those answers as well. I am very sensitive to electric. I've had my electric turned off because I couldn't pay for it. That's how sensitive I am to the citizens. It's terrible. It's degrading. And we need to look at it and see what we can do. But I would like those answers. Why is it costing so much? And can the staff do it?
I can't answer why it's costing so much, other than it's a consultant. They are experts in their field, more expert than we have on staff. I know originally their price was much higher, and staff worked with them to negotiate it down to something that we thought was affordable, even though it's still a lot of money. I understand that. We have staff that do their job day in and day out on a set schedule and a set job. This is going to take a large amount of time, and it's going to take more expertise than we have on staff. It was never understood by myself that this was intended to be an in-house project. When this board adopted their 2021 and 2022 goals, I was asked to put the rate study for the enterprise funds on the parking lot list. That's what we've done. That adopted parking lot goals said complete rate study for the enterprise funds. It was always, at least in my understanding, that we would hire out a consultant to do that, so that it wasn't staff trying to put something together, that it was somebody who had complete autonomy from the standpoint of being pro or promoting or decrease or an increase, that they would come in and they would study our operations, study where we're going, study what our growth is, study what our future needs are going to be to continue to provide the service that we provide. Yes, we are growing, and yes, there are more revenue from that. But at the same time, as we grow, we have more cost. We have an increase in cost. If it's the board's pleasure to put this off for years, that's your pleasure. If it's the board's pleasure not to do a rate study, that's your pleasure. What we at staff tried to do was to follow the goal that the board directed us to do. It's your call whether or not you wish to move forward. If it's too expensive, we understand that. It's a lot of money. If you decide to not do this and direct us to try to do it in-house, we will. It may take a longer period of time. I don't know that we'll be as smart on the subject as what these individuals are, but we'll try that. So I want to reiterate again that at least from our perspective, my perspective as the city administrator, I was trying to follow what I believe the policy and the direction of this board was. And it's your call. I mean, it's not staff's decision by any means. It's your decision.
Vice Mayor, thank you for those answers, because that's exactly what I thought they were going to be. Because I believe that we need to have a private company do this so that no one says, we've manipulated the numbers, we've done this, we've done that. I think it needs to be a private vendor. And I've looked at different cities, I've called different cities. Every one of them does their rates differently. Anyway, to me, there are some fees that some cities charge, we don't charge. It's not just cut and dried. There's a lot to it. And I think the professional needs to do it. Now, do we want to spend $120,000? That's the question. And do we want to do it now? I do think you need to do that. At some point, if you are going to run this as a business, you need to have a starting point. You need to know where you are. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I do want to say, I agree with David Allen that when we do a study, I really think we should go out. You said you did an RFQ and not an RFP, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I do know the difference between them. And I really think an RFP allows for a better understanding of what you're getting for your money. An RFQ is just a qualification. An RFP, it gives you more of a definition of what service you're getting for the money that you're getting. And so I think if we do postpone, I think we should delay. I think Mindy is correct, and Carol has suggested that. I think we should maybe suggested that we should postpone this because this is the worst year to introduce this. So that was my suggestion, is do an RFP instead of an RFQ. And as far as Carol, you said that everybody keeps saying, why are they saying this is an increase? Well, we have a memo sitting right in front of us that says to determine if an increase should be considered.
It doesn't specifically say an increase.
Yes, it does say it. I'm looking right
Well,
at it.
it says, this is what it says. A formal rate study for water, sewer, solid waste, and electric has not been done in at least 7 years. One of the board's 2020-22 parking lot goals was to complete a rate study for enterprise funds. The purpose of the rate study is to determine if revenues are sufficient to cover the cost of service in each utility. The study will involve the development of a financial plan for each utility that will assess the impact of funding future operating and capital needs over a 5-year period and determine if an increase should be considered over the next 5 years. It's an if. But the other thing that you all need to understand, you're talking about all of these new homes coming in and generating revenue, but it also means we need more capital improvements, in my opinion. That we will need to have more electrical, more water, all of that to accommodate all of the new people that are coming in. And we don't know if that rate, does that study look at that as well? What our equipment will provide and the numbers?
It will look at, excuse me, it will look at capital, our capital expenses and what they need to be over the next 5 years.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. Trash trucks.
Pardon?
Trash trucks are the first thing that popped into my mind because as the city continues to grow, we have more roll carts. We have one truck that goes around and picks up the roll carts. We're now using a second one to help that first one out. So the second one runs about half a day, so that the first one can just run 8 hours. As we grow, we're gonna most likely wind up having to run 2 trucks. So that would be an example of a capital.
And this is not just electricity. I think everybody has jumped on that because that brings the most revenue in. But this is all of our enterprise funds.
Correct. Collectively, everybody is.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to beat on this horse a little more. I just remind my fellow board members that the next meeting, we're going to approve a budget. And I just opened up to the street department outlay as an example. And if $120,000 bothers you, then the millions of dollars that we're going to spend next year, you're going to hear the welling and gnashing of certainties in this town. We are spending money, budgeted money next year for projects. We approved them. We approved them on this board. And we can't sit here going into the next year with this concern and this compassion, which is fantastic. It's the servant's heart. It's glorious. But at the end of the day, we're doing business. And that business is moving this city forward. That's what we have to do. So I just remind you again, we're making points, we're doing business, up or down. I request we put it to a vote, and let's get on with this meeting, please.
Thank you. Director Coleman, do you have a comment or two, or you want to, you're good? I'd like to say something concerning it. I've had people reach out, and it seems the first thing they say is a rate increase. And that may be what I would consider as well, if that's all I heard. But as I look into this and I read through it and discuss it, having a study like this allows us the opportunity to be proactive. And I'd much rather be on the end where we are looking ahead and seeing what's going on instead of playing catch up. If you want to have big expense, look at the cities and communities that are trying to play catch up. If we can go out ahead of this and find out, because I really think that the rate study is going to create an equilibrium that we can work with, working with those who need some help. Because it's not just utilities that are going up. Housing is going up, rent is going up. We can be compassionate toward that. We can work toward that end. But if we don't know where we stand and what foundation we work from, we're asking people to lead in a blind sense. I think something like this, or I believe, something like this rate study will allow us to have a platform to stand firm to where when Steve does his work, Christina does her work, and the other city employees do theirs, we have a unity and a place to build from together. And when we look 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we have a much more firm foundation. I've had a suggestion from Director Burns that we go ahead and put this to a vote. Is that our pleasure? Okay.
I'm not against the rate study. I've worked with city municipalities for almost 20 years. I understand the value of the rate study. I understand the timing of the rate study too. And I also understand the difference between an RFQ and an RFP. And you can get better service, better rates, and all the way through with an RFP. And we did not do an RFP in this case. And that needs to be taken into consideration. I think that we should consider tabling it and looking at an RFP instead of having an RFQ to define if we were going to move forward with this one.
Are you making a motion?
I'd make a motion to table it.
Second.
May I
City Administrator.
Tabling it usually is tabling it to date specific. What I would suggest you do, if that's, is just to withdraw it and send staff to go do, if that's your prerogative to do an RFP rather than an RFQ. Tabling it, you have the right to table it, and Jay, help me out, if you table it and there's no date specific, it will go away at the end of the year, is that?
That is typically how it works.
Yes.
Can you not do an RFQ within a 30-day period?
I don't know that we can publish an RFP.
I mean, I'm sorry, an RFP, yes.
I don't
thank
know that
you
we
for
can
it.
publish one, I don't know that we can write one and publish it and give the 30-day period for responses. I mean, it's again,
45 to 60
I'm
days.
sorry,
It's usually 45 to 60 days. I've seen it done.
yes, and we're in November. It's the board's pleasure, I'm just saying, if you table it, usually it's tabled to a date specific. And if you're tabling it, you're really gonna reconsider what is before you today. If you're asking staff to go do an RFP, I would suggest you just vote this down or withdraw it, motion to withdraw and direct staff to go do an RFP.
And I motion to withdraw and staff to do an RFP so we get more precise information and service with the value of the money.
Director Sappington, do you still hold your second?
Second.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the motion.
Oh. I motion that we withdraw it and have staff look at an RFP instead of an RFQ to get detailed more information on the service and the value of our dollar.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay. City Administrator, on this, if we vote on this and it does not pass, then we would go with a new motion?
Correct. If the motion fails, you still have to address the rate study that's proposed before you.
Okay. Have a motion and a second to withdraw this to do a rate study. Roll call.
Burns?
No.
Hunt? Yes. Chrysler?
Yes.
Coleman?
No.
Carroll?
No.
Sappington?
Yes.
Smiley?
No.
Renee, what is the outcome?
3.
No. The motion fails.
4 noes, 3 yeses.
That brings us to a new motion if we desire to have.
Vice Mayor,
Director Burns.
request, make a motion to approve the rate study contract for Public Works and Electric Department with 1898 and the company in the amount of $120,500.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second? Roll call.
Hunt?
No.
Chrysler?
No.
Coleman?
Yes.
Carroll?
Yes.
Sappington?
No.
Smiley? Yes. Burns?
Yes.
4 yeses,
Motion
3
carries.
noes.
Thank you. This brings us to item E on the consent agenda that was withdrawn, or taken off as a consent. Resolution 50-20, preliminary plat development permit, Mission Hill Edition, 14505 North Country Club Road. Ben?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor and members of the board. I'm Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Before you is a preliminary plat permit occurring at 14505 North Country Club Road. The request is to develop a 120-lot subdivision in 2 phases and to request the PUD zone upon annexation of the property. To date, the annexation request has not been submitted to the city for review, but I understand that it is that from the applicant that this is in the review process currently at Benton County. This is the final site plan. I'd like to point out a park that is indicated with several amenities, and that's where I've circled that, such as play equipment, and this will be maintained by a POA brought about by the developer. This is the master development plan. The difference with this plan as compared to the ones I showed you in the last slide is that we see the final improvements with the houses and the drives drawn in, with the color-coded depiction of each area. In addition to the park, there are two large normally dry detention basins that will be also open for recreational use when they're dry. Street connection is located here. That will connect onto a net drive that goes to the crossings addition, and that will be gated. And this was done at the city's request to prevent through traffic from the crossings and the new development from Mission Hill to impact the streets and the crossings, which are currently county maintained and are substandard to the city's level service. For example, Davidson Road is unpaved if you're familiar with that area. Because the applicant is wanting to zone to PD, they have the option to customize their zoning. This is very similar to what was reviewed earlier this year by the board for the Foxtail Edition that's located on Highway 16, as you might recall. Some notable departures from the standard R2 zone is that the minimum lot size is reduced by 1,000 square feet to 6,000 square feet. The SARD yard setback is reduced by 3 feet to 5 feet, and the minimum lot width is reduced by 10 feet. Lot coverage and floor area ratio have also increased. So in exchange for the proposed changes, the applicant will establish the POA, will include the park that I mentioned, plant shade trees along the streets, and also include a decorative sign. And the park was originally planned for the frontage area along North Country Club. However, staff was able to request that the developer move this to the interior of the project. Under the current subdivision codes, parks are not required, so this is an addition from what we normally get. And there are currently no parks in this area. And here you see an example of the subdivision sign and a description of the open space and landscaping there below. Sidewalks will also be included throughout the development and along North Country Club Road, and of course those sidewalks will connect to the proposed park. And also just keep in mind that the proposed zoning standards are provided in reference to the preliminary plat that's under review right now. The zoning will be addressed with the annexation ordinance. If the annexation or the zoning is not approved, that will automatically disqualify the preliminary plat. The two are linked, and that's through a condition. Finally, here is the site view. This is looking to the north. The street in the foreground is the northernmost street of Endura Park, the development that's immediately to the south of this area. Staff is recommending approval with two needed conditions. The first is that the applicant must provide privacy fencing along the north and east sides of the project. This is normally not required, but as a special request, or staff has made a special request because the density is considerably smaller than what adjoins the development. And so this additional fencing will help mitigate some of the visual impacts as well as increase the security of the surrounding properties. The wording on that condition was updated since the Planning Commission review to better clarify when the fencing needed to be put in. The second condition requires that the property be annexed and zoned prior to the final plat acceptance by the city board. And with that, we are available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
So, for the public first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you have any public comments or questions?
Jeff Farmer, 21923 Davidson Road. I'd like to ask about the streetlights, what kind of streetlights they plan on installing, and if, when you said north and east property lines, or we're talking about the entire north and east property lines for privacy fencing, and the drainage that goes to the north out of that field, because it's there's lots and lots of water that comes off that field right there, right through my, to the side of my property, to the eastern side of my property, and it has been known to wash out driveways on Davidson, and even wash out Davidson at time too. But that's, if you could answer those questions for me, I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. And is that something we can answer now, or would you like to? Okay.
Ben Rhodes again. So some of the questions I can answer, some of them I might need to defer to other staff.
Okay.
So regarding the fencing, that is the condition, number one. That actually, just for further information on that, that came about also because a neighbor called concerned about the density, and so we did add that condition in there. So that will go along the entire north side of the project. So if I go back here on the, you can get the PowerPoint back up, please. That would be along the entire north end. I guess we're not getting the PowerPoint, but yeah, this is the north side of the property. And then the street lighting would be standard, what we would do anywhere. It would be obviously illuminating the street, so if they're not angled, to neighboring properties. And my understanding is the drainage meets all the city standards for the drainage, but I'd be happy to defer to city staff. Engineering is here to maybe answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Justin Blank, city engineer. Yes, as Ben said, this does meet the drainage manual requirements, which is done by the detention basin, and then the northeast corner here that would address the water draining across Mr. Farmer's property. It would actually kind of come across this corner right here. There's also another detention basin in the southeast corner, and this water actually crosses over the Country Club Road to the east. But both of those will detain the water such that the post-development peak flows from the side don't exceed pre-development levels.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Anyone else from the public?
Oh.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to the board, and I do think Marla had it.
Well, I thought Mr. Farmer said something about the east side for a fencing fee, but maybe not.
He was talking about the north side
North
fencing.
side.
The reason that I asked for this to be full was on the second condition. I feel like if we're requiring them to be annexed for this to go ahead and continue through the process, we're tying this to Endura's annexation. And I feel like, because it doesn't touch anywhere unless Endura Park is done. And I feel like we're kind of jumping ahead if we go ahead and say, let's annex, once we do the plan on it, that everything, when it goes through all the steps, then it must be annexed. Well, we can't tell it to get annexed because it doesn't fit our guidelines.
That's not accurate. Right here is Endura Park.
But Endura Park has not gone through all the readings.
That's correct. They don't need
So
Endura.
that's why I said that.
They don't need Endura Park.
Okay,
They don't need Endura Park. They can connect over here. This is not Endura Park. This is city limits going up along the east side. And this is a subdivision called Nottingham.
Across the road.
Across the road. And you can touch by our ordinance across the road. That's considered touching for annexation.
Even though county owns part of the road?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I don't see how that's possible if that's county land.
Well, it's considered contiguous. We do it all the time. There's been many annexations that go across the road.
Well, I'll watch more, but I haven't seen one come through like this since I've been on the board.
disclosure with the applicant for the project. The reason our annexation actually got held up was, and right-of-way gets a little tricky, because right-of-way isn't fee simple owned by the county or the city. Sometimes it is, most of the time it's dedicated with a subdivision, and, there's ownership underneath that right-of-way, so it's not, fee simple given to the county. In this case, it was. The county does own this piece of property. It's not simply right-of-way easement over a piece of property that somebody else owns. So when we submitted our petition for annexation to the county, they said, hey, add our right-of-way into your petition. So we actually had to revise our petition and send it back to them. So that's why we got held up for a couple of weeks. It's with them now, and we expect to have it hopefully in the next 2 weeks to let it get to the city.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Vice Mayor.
Dr. Burns?
Hey, Ben, so, and this might help, how many looms are new lighting? What do we give off as far as lighting goes? Do you remember we talked about that before?
Well, for parking lots, the limit is 0.5 strip candles at the property line. I don't know if that applies to street lighting there. That would be for like a parking lot in a commercial addition, something to that effect.
It's, what it does is instead of throwing broadcasting light, it directs it down towards the area.
That's correct, the shield is down, yes.
Right. And then thank you, Ben, and I think I brought this up at another meeting, our last meeting actually. This area in the past, we've had the residents that live right on the edge, because we're right on the border, that they had lived in the county, and now the city is encroaching out there and they don't have that country feel anymore. And this is an example. And as we continue to build in these areas, and Kenwood's another example, is that these areas absorb water and they shed water. And as we continue to build more hard surface, then obviously our discharge will continue to grow and expound itself. And the people downstream who are going to be in the county, and I know our engineering department does great work, but if you look at the subdivision to the east, and Crine, the development he's doing out there, they have the same issues that we're discussing here. And we worked really hard to work on that drainage. I would just remind city staff that as we continue to grow and develop, watershed is us controlling watershed for people that are downstream, because everything from this point starts going down. And if you look at the topography of this, the picture I'm looking at, we look to the north, it shows Swepco, that city lake down there, and everything, water flows downhill. And these subdivisions are going to significantly increase our discharge. And I know we're going through great lengths to slow that discharge. But the reality is as we continue to develop to the north, which I'm 100% behind, we are going to have to perhaps look at different ways to discharge that water. I think Director Coleman, we talked about this before, about our concerns about these retention ponds and gates, and who at the end of the day keeps care of them. And I think this is a perfect example of, I hope that that POA works properly. I hope that that gets enforced. I hope that all works like it says on paper, but our experience here is that we end up with a problem somewhere down the road. And I wish we look at greener ways to capture and filtrate water instead of holding and thinking we have a timing on discharge, because this has been a problematic area looking to the north and the east for a long period of time. And I know you guys are aware of it. And so I made you aware of it again. Thank you, Ben.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yes, Director Sackington.
I am not against this development, I want you to know that. I just want clarification, and it helps me. And I know when I ask the questions, it's also helping the people in the public that want to know the same thing, because we're not supposed to make enclaves, and this misleadingly looks like it would be an enclave if it was annexed and Endura Park wasn't. That's just why I said that. And also on the chart A7, existing land uses and zoning, it says east is residential multifamily. I know it's separated by a county road if I'm seeing the map in front of me, but if I'm just looking at that chart, I don't know that there's a road in between. It's not abutting that zoning or that development. It is separated by a road. And it's hard to see that if you don't have the picture in front of you by looking at that chart, because it says surrounding land uses residential, 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 residential. But it's not. There's a road there.
Right.
And so I didn't know if there's any way that we could, I don't know if it'd be good for anybody else or just me saying that there's a road on the east side separating.
I can do that, whatever the board wants.
Well,
for reports.
Do you see what I'm saying? It makes it sound like that it's abutting all four different areas, just right up against it. And it's not. There's a road there. And we're gonna have to address the issues of that road, the improvements, sidewalks and stuff. And I can't see that from that chart.
I understand. And all the charts have never taken account roads. Anything on Highway 412, I say abutting would be on the north side of
Absolutely.
Highway 412. So that's just, it's just to give you the idea of what the land use is around there, not where the connectivity is to the streets. That we can include something along
Is
there.
it mentioned somewhere else?
It would be shown as part of the development plan, as far as like the future land use map and the general area map, like the one that I'm displaying here has the road on the side.
Right.
So there's different places where that's put in, but we can certainly do more efforts to highlight that in future reports if that's your pleasure.
Well, we don't always have the map in front of us, and we're going strictly off the road word, what's written.
Right.
And we want to make it as easy to understand as we can.
Thank you, Ben. Any other questions of the board?
Vice Mayor?
Yes,
Make a
Director.
motion to approve resolution number 5-20, authorizing a preliminary plat development permit for 14505 North Country Club Road, subject to recommended conditions of approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. I didn't know if I heard it or not, Director Burns, but it's 50-20, if that wasn't clarified. We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Rissler?
Yes.
Coleman?
Yes.
Carroll?
Yes.
Sappington?
Yes.
Smiley?
Yes.
Burns?
Yes.
Hunt?
Yes.
Motion passes. We will now get into our regularly scheduled items. Ordinance 2028. We're at the second reading, annexation of 39.22 acres, 14701 North Country Club Road. Ben.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor and Board. Before you is the second reading for the annexation request that to take in the 39.22 acres of territory on the north side of North Country Club Road. And this is the site of the Endura Park subdivision. As a reminder, the applicant is proposing to the R2, R4, and PK zones specified in the attached zoning plan. Since the first reading, staff has not received any additional comments on this. We continue to recommend approval, and we stand by for any of your questions. Thank you.
Do we have any input from the public? Being none, I'll turn this over to the board for questions of staff. Being none, do we have a motion?
Vice Mayor, I make a motion to place ordinance number 20-28 on its second reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? None. Roll call?
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley, yes. Burns,
Yes.
Hunt, yes. Whistler.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next, we have ordinance.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
may I read the ordinance?
Oh.
Excuse me, Vice Mayor, I'm sorry.
please do.
Ordinance number 20-28, an ordinance accepting the annexation of certain territory described as the Enduro Park addition to the city of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and assigning the same to a ward.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the next item. Ordinance 20-29, second reading, annexation of 6.10 acres, 22,000, Highway 16. Ben Rhodes.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Vice Mayor and Board. Before you is the second reading for the second annexation request. This is to take in the 6.1 acres off of Highway 16 South. The applicant is proposing the I-2 zone. We have not received any comments on this one either since the last reading, and we continue to recommend approval. Stand by for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any input from the public? Being none, I'll turn this over to the board.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I would like to place ordinance number 20-29 on its second and third reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Okay, so taking that second and third. Do we have a second?
Second.
Or, I'm sorry, was that a motion or you?
That was a motion.
That was a motion for
Yeah.
both, okay. And we have a second. Any discussion on the motion? Roll call?
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley, yes. Burns,
Yes.
Hunt, yes. Whistler,
Yes.
Coleman.
Yes.
Or the motion passes. City Administrator.
Ordinance number 20-29, an ordinance accepting the annexation of certain territory described as the Beehive addition to the city of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and assigning the same to a ward.
So we've had the second and third reading. Now we'll have a motion to adopt. Thank you. That's the hard word.
So moved.
So
Second.
moved. And a second. Roll call?
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley, yes. Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll.
Yes. City Administrator. Motion passes.
Yes.
I'm getting there. All right, now that we've had the motion pass, do we have a motion to adopt?
I'm sorry, that was the motion to
That
adopt.
was it.
I'm sorry.
That motion to adopt passed.
Motion to adopt passed.
Trying to get you to laugh.
Okay, I've done that already. I'm ready for you to do your part.
No, I read the second, third readings.
Okay,
We had a motion to adopt. That motion passed. Now we're on ordinance 20-30.
great. I'll be glad to be done with 2029. Next item on our agenda, ordinance 20-30, first reading, amending section 102-21 of the city municipal code, rezoning from R2 to C2, 125 A and B East Kenwood Street. Ben Rhodes.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Vice Mayor and members of the board. I have to get used to saying Vice Mayor. So before you is a rezoning development permit. This is occurring at 125 East Kenwood Street. The request is to rezone at 0.44 acres from R2 to C2 roadway commercial. The property is currently being used as commercial business and is not a residence. The rezoning request is an effort to bring the property into conformity with the zoning code and to allow for building project on the property. Here is the full site plan that was provided. The addition I mentioned will potentially be located up here on the north side of the building. And in fact, it was the building permit that triggered the need for the rezoning once we determined that that was going to be an issue. Looking at the future land use map, you see the area is considered mixed use. That's shown in the brown color shading, and the medium density family in the orange shading. For the purposes of the rezoning, staff's considering the whole property as mixed use, and the commercial would work with that designation. And here is the property looking to the north. As you can tell, it's been used as commercial for at least 20 years. So this is just bringing it back into conformity with the zone. Staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval of the rezone with no needed conditions, and we stand ready for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Do we have any input from the public? Being none, I'll turn this over to the board.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I move that we place ordinance number 20-30 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Driscoll,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Stafford.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Ordinance number 20-30, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code, City Zoning Map, rezoning from R2 to C2, property located at 125 A and B East Kenwood Street.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, ordinance 20-31. First reading, amending section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from A-1 to R1, Villa View Subdivision.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor and
Yes,
board. So you're now considering the second rezoning request this evening. This is at the Villa View Estates Edition, and this is going from A1 to R1 residential large. So you'll note that unlike traditional rezoning applications, this one is actually being sponsored by the city staff. It's a little bit different. So I want to kind of cover why we're doing this and what the background here. So the reason this came about was due to a pending lot line adjustment between two lots in the subdivision. The issue is that the current A1 zone requires a minimum 3-acre lot size. So a smaller lot size on the proposed lot brought about by that lot line adjustment is just not allowed within the A1 zone. So essentially halted that ability for the two property owners to shift the line because one of the lots was shrinking in size. So the best remedy to this situation is to rezone. The area was rezoned, or was zoned to A1 when it was annexed in the city in 2005. So when staff looked at this, due to this kind of being a larger issue with the subdivision impacting everyone around that area, staff decided to take on the rezoning really in an effort on behalf of these two property owners to address the entire subdivision. Because this is something that is not initiated by the property owners, we wanted to make absolutely sure everyone understood We sent out several letters to them and everyone who lives there, and held several neighborhood meetings. Those were at the library. Everyone attended was in favor of the rezoning, but they did question on the lot size. So originally, we selected the R2 zone, which is sort of the standard residential zone in Siloam. We don't really have a whole lot of R1, but in this situation, we thought, well, because these lots are a little bit larger, that we go ahead with the R1 zone instead. Just to give you a comparison, the R1 allows for a 10,000 square foot lot, whereas R2 is a 7,000 square foot. So we are kind of bumping up a little bit. So here is, I know that might be kind of hard to read, but this is the original subdivision plat dating back to the 1960s, I believe. These lots were originally designed to be all over 2 acres. However, over the years, they have been split into smaller pieces, but none larger than 1 acre. And the reason for that is there's actually no city sewer out here. When this was annexed in, the closest sewer was down at that corner. So all these homes have our septic, and the health department requires a minimum of 1 acre size lot for septic services. So looking at the future land use map, that is shown as low density family. We believe that the R1 zone does fit in with this. All the lots are slightly smaller than ½ acre at 10,000 square foot. And here you see the site looking to the north. We tried to get as much of the subdivision as we could, but it's obviously pretty big, but lots of trees out there. So apart from the comments registered at the public meeting, staff did receive a letter in opposition, and that was attached to your packet that you should have already received. So staff, but apart from that, there wasn't any other letters or opposition. So staff is recommending approval for the R1 zone, and we're available for any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Do you have any comments from the public? Being none, I'll turn this over to the board.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor. Thank you, Ben. I especially appreciate the city sending out the notices and having the forums for the citizens to come in and ask any questions. This is in my ward. I did not hear from any of the citizens, one way or the other, about this. So I consider that positive, especially since they were all aware of what was going on. I do have just a couple of questions that were mentioned by the one resident who did send a note expressing his concerns about it, mentioning that the negatives are rezoning could potentially allow up to 4 dwelling units, which could potentially decrease property values. How likely is that to happen?
Well, one reason, thank you for that question. One reason why I brought up the septic was that is somewhat locking these lots in place in terms of lot size.
Okay.
Because you can't split something off and still have it on a septic system. So until the city or property owners raise funds to extend sewer through this entire subdivision, I would imagine it would stay pretty much as is. Okay. Until those things was to happen. And then even at that point, you have matters of setbacks and lot frontage requirements and things that I don't believe every lot in the subdivision is going to be able to split off a 10,000 square foot lot and have it work. So there's several protections I believe in place that will more likely keep it pretty much as is now.
And has that been communicated back to this particular resident?
I initially emailed him, then he submitted a letter, but it was addressed to the planning commission, so I didn't step in there and respond back to him when we received the second letter.
Well, it's on record now.
Yes.
Further discussion? Ask for a motion.
Sure, I'll get back to it. I will move that we approve, RZ 20-06, the rezone development permit for Villageview Estates. Yes.
I believe you made.
I need to go back one more. Okay, that's right. Well, this is the first reading, right?
Yes.
Okay. I move that we place ordinance number 20-31 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only. There you go.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Discussion on the motion. Roll call.
Burns,
Yes.
Hart,
Yes.
Risler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Staffington,
Yes.
Wiley.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Ordinance number 20-31, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code, City Zoning Map, rezoning from A1 to R1 properties located in the 2100 to 2500 block of Villageview Drive, the 2100 to 2700 block of Orchard Hill Road, and the 1800 to 1900 block of Sycamore Heights Road, all within the Villageview Estates Edition.
Thank you, Administrator. Now to staff reports.
I believe we have one more ordinance.
Mr. Vice Mayor, can I just step in and
Yes,
ask?
we do.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
You had mentioned the sewer and septic tanks. Do we have a plan to, everybody that has city utilities or in the city limits to have access to city sewer and not be on septic tanks? It's a thought.
I'll do my best to answer it. It's not exactly my area, but I do understand that we don't allow new septics if they have the ability to connect to city sewer. I believe that is a policy. Or if the septic fails, then the city would want them to connect at that point. As far as the programming, capital improvement programming as to when lines will be put in that area, I do not have the information at this time. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the correction, City Administrator. Ordinance 20-32, first reading, amending Chapter 102, zoning, fence and driveway permits. Ben Rhodes.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Vice Mayor and Board. So I'd like to shift gears now and present a proposed code change to Chapter 102, which is the city's zoning code. This is to permit the city to offer fence and paving permits. And this is needed due to these aspects being regulated within the zoning code, but not subject to permitting if they're not associated or attached with some other permit, like a building permit or a significant development or something else that we would be reviewing. So we have also added, in addition to the permitting requirements, a site distance triangle definition, and this is to better define the area, particularly when it comes in play with fencing, which, as you may be aware, is somewhat of a safety issue if you can't see around the corner, and so we really need to define what is the site distance triangle in the zoning code, because there's presently not a definition in the zoning code at all for site distance triangle. In terms of the permit fee, we initially set that at $25 for both permits, but we did want to allow a break for the residential customers, so we reduced that to just $10 for anyone who is a resident or a residential property where the work is happening. So we just wanted to give you some visuals. I like the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so here's just some examples as far as why this has risen to staff's attention. On the left here, you see a fence that's been placed over the extension of a sidewalk. As you imagine, that's problematic, and had there been fence permitting, we might have been able to catch that before the fence went up. On the other two on the right are just examples of fences being put over manhole covers, water meters. So there's things that are happening that just are problematic for the maintenance and portion of our utilities. As far as the paving examples, these are just some of projects that have happened that staff were not part of any building permit. They just came in one day and it's there today and it wasn't there the previous day. And that would be, this is a parking area that was designed all the way up to the curb. As you know, from looking at the significant development projects and some of the other things that come before the city board, there is a green space buffer that's required. So this is not meeting that. Again, there you have another one where we have a gravel lot that's more than 10 spaces. Our code now is that if there's 10 or fewer spaces, that would be a gravel lot, but anything greater than 10 has to be paved. So there's just things like that that, again, are not associated with any type of building permit, so staff is not having any way of knowing on the front end before the projects happen what's going on, and it'd be more costly for us to come to the owner after the fact and then tell them they need to change something after they've done the work. Here is just some examples of paving that was not authorized that are over certain city infrastructure that could be damaged if that paving's not of the right quality. So just in terms of the permitting itself, because I know there's some questions about that, if someone does not have access to their lot information or dimensions, staff will be able to assist them in putting together their permit applications. So no one's going to be turned away simply because they don't have access to their lot information or their lot width or depth. We have files here that we can look up a lot of that information for them and help them put together their applications. So this is similar to what we're doing with other permits like the accessory building permits and things like that. If people don't have the information, we try to assist them as best we can. Staff and the Planning Commission have reviewed this, and we are recommending approval, and we stand ready for any of your correct questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Input from the public? Being none, I'll turn this over to the board. I'll entertain a motion.
Vice Mayor, I think we all got a letter from one particular citizen expressing a concern about it. I think with the timing the way it is, and this just being on its first reading, I'm ready to go ahead and put it on the first reading, and then I think he's going to come to a meeting to express those concerns. But I think he brought up some legitimate things, but I also understand from the city's perspective, trying to be proactive. So just wanted to acknowledge that we did hear from a resident about it. Are we ready for a motion on this one?
Yes.
Okay, then I will move that we place ordinance number 20-32 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Second?
And a second. Discussion on the motion. Roll call?
Hunt,
Yes.
Sisler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Atkinson,
Yes.
Smiley, yes, Burke.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Ordinance number 20-32, an ordinance amending chapter 102 zoning code of the municipal code with respect to paving and fence permits and other matters.
Okay, now we have staff reports. Comprehensive plan update. Don Clark.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Board. Don Clark, Community Development Director. It's been some time since this item's been in front of you, so I just kind of wanted to come up and give you an update of where we are currently and how we are planning on proceeding with this project. So to remind you, the comprehensive plan is the foundation of the city's planning program, guiding growth and development for the coming decades. It's a policy document that informs decision-making and resource allocation. So a lot of the things you saw tonight in those planning-related items, things like the future land use map comes from a comprehensive plan. A lot of those recommendations that we take and put into the subdivision comes from the comprehensive plan. The city's current comprehensive plan was adopted in 2009, and in March of this year, the board approved a contract with Freeze Nichols Incorporated to begin work on updating the city's comprehensive plan. In April, the work on the comprehensive plan was put on hold due to the coronavirus outbreak. This allowed the time for the city to assess the pandemic impact on the community and adjust projects and services accordingly. Some of those concerns was obviously with a document like this, it's a guiding document for the entire city, is that it calls for quite a few public meetings, and so we wanted to make sure that we had a better understanding of how we could proceed going into those areas. So as we continue navigating through the public health and economic crisis, an updated plan reflecting the community's involvement and support will ensure the city can focus on the big picture and its highest priorities. Due to the current development uptick that we're seeing today, the timing is right to make sure we get this document and this process updated. Key elements of how we proceed, how we are planning to proceed with the comprehensive plan update are as follows. So this is a project, if you recall, in March we talked about an 18-month timeline. So if we were to start in January of 2021, we would look at wrapping it up around May of 2022. In that time frame, what will be happening, one of the first things that we would need to do is a comprehensive plan advisory committee who will help guide and inform the planning process and have regular meetings with the consulting team. The members of this committee will be brought to the board for ratification from a recommendation of the mayor. So these are citizens and business owners who we would pull and put on this CPAC, that we will call it, to make sure that they're helping guide through this process. Updates to the board and the planning commission will be conducted through joint workshops. So throughout this 18-month period, as we get to certain milestones, we will come back to the board and the planning commission in a joint workshop fashion and keep you up to date on the progress and how we're going through with the comprehensive plan. As for the public involvement plan, we will meet project objectives while also addressing the public safety as best as we can. So self-serving meeting kits are things that we will be looking at doing. Online virtual meetings that can be live as well as recorded. Community surveys that can be online and hard copies. Outreach information that we can put in utility bills, as well as using kiosks that can be located here, community development, or on the public computers at the library. Physical exhibits that we can put up, throughout public buildings to show the work and the progress of the comprehensive plan updates. And then also we're proposing a project website. This website will include the background information, the schedule, meeting materials, all videos and links that are associated with this project. So at any time someone has a question, they can go to that, as well as point people from the staff perspective that can meet with any individual that has any questions as we go through this process and make sure that we can get their comments and their feedback. That's going to be super important because again, this is a guiding document that incorporates the entire city. So to go back through the plan content, there's 10 areas of what we're going to, that will be incorporated into this plan. The first one will be community profile, which is a snapshot in an appendix or a separate document. So a profile of our community as it stands today. The vision, guiding principles, and goals of that comprehensive plan. The future land use. So again, that future land use map that you often see being used, as he talks about, this is projected for our whatever, for medium density, that is driven from this project. So we'll be able to see growth patterns and where we need to grow and update that future land use map to make sure it's represented accordingly. Transportation and mobility, economic development, housing, livability, community character, public facilities, services and utilities, and implementation plan and strategy. So at the end of that, how do we implement this plan and the strategy to proceed with that? There are a number of different things that can come out of this, as well as some potential code updates to make sure our code is in concert with our future, our comprehensive plan. So we understand that there's going to be a need for us to be creative for the public input And so we're willing to look at all those different ways of doing so. The consultant that we've hired has been working on some comprehensive plans with other cities during this pandemic. We will look at those and evaluate how their public input has went, how creative, how much feedback, was it responsive? Because again, the community voice is going to be very important as we go through this plan document. So that's where we are, again, with us planning to proceed in January, picking up this and going forward with this comprehensive plan. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. September financials.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So September financials are in your packet going forward. Appreciate the comments that I got a few meetings ago, I think it was, recognizing that once the state law changed about providing monthly financials, we had been giving them to the board but not putting them in the board packet, so you're going to start seeing those in the board packet every month. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to contact myself or Christina. As it relates to my administrator's report, I have 3 expenditures over $30,000 to report. The first one, $45,099 in the electric department for inventory and AMI meters. In the street division, $30,530 for road salt and beet juice, and that's for as we move into inclement weather to be able to use to prevent some of the freezing on the roads. In the water division, we have purchased the last easement needed for the new water line between the Illinois River and the water treatment plant. That expenditure was $42,995.04. I've added the fall cleanup numbers for your benefit, and I also added a comparison between the total numbers picked up in 2020 and 2019. 2020, obviously, we didn't have a spring cleanup, and we had the drop-off in July. There wasn't nearly as much dropped off as what we would normally pick up. The difference between those 2 years is about 133 tons. So it's still a very big program for us to pick up all of the debris that the residents put out there. This year in the fall, with 230 tons being picked up, we not only use the solid waste crews, but we use crews from other divisions to help pick all of that material up in 1 week. There's a drainage project, improvement project that is being currently done on Sunset Lane. That's been a project that's been on the books as part of the budgeted for this year. So we started that project earlier, as a matter of fact, yesterday. Hope to be finished with that in a couple of weeks. I'm going to skip number 4 and come back to that. My COVID update, as many of you know, we're seeing the numbers spike. I think it's very important that we remind the public to be vigilant when it comes to wearing masks, washing your hands, doing all the hygienic routines that we do. One of the things that I track based on the information from the ACHI, the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement, you can see there in the first table, these are the new cases per 10,000 population. Siloam Springs is doing better than the other cities in northwest Arkansas, the big 4. But in September the 28th, we had 9 new cases for the week. Moving to October 5th, 10 new cases. October 12th, 17 new cases. October 19th, 22. And October 26th, 21 new cases per week per 10,000 people in our city. So our numbers are beginning to tick up a little bit. And then in that second box, I provided just the total cumulative cases, positive cases. You can see in Siloam Springs from September the 28th, we had 640 positive and jumping up to 779 by sort of the end of October. Every week I'm on a webinar conference call with Dr. Thompson from the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement and the Arkansas Municipal League. And one of the things that he mentioned this week, which I thought was very fascinating, that the President's Committee on COVID had reached out to the state that we need to do a better job. In looking at the number of COVID-related deaths per capita, Arkansas is number 4 in the nation, behind North and South Dakota and Montana. So that's a huge increase in the number of deaths per capita that we're seeing in the state. Just today, the governor mentioned additional information that he is looking at trying to do some other opportunities, but I think it's, again, important that we ask all the residents, all the citizens, the businesses to continue to mandate the wearing of masks, continue to encourage people to wash their hands, don't congregate in crowds. We're going to have to be careful as we go into the holiday season. We're all going to want to, have Thanksgiving and Christmas with our family members, but we're still going to have to be mindful that COVID is still here. Lastly, on the COVID issue, the best that I can calculate, the governor's statewide health emergency currently extends through November 5th. I believe it's likely that the governor will extend that emergency again. Our citywide emergency is currently through November the 11th. As I've done previously, if the governor extends the statewide emergency, I would like to ask the board at least not to object, for the city to continue and for me to allow me to continue to extend the citywide emergency in case we start seeing numbers spike. We have had pretty good success of asking people to wear their masks when they come to City Hall and the other city facilities. We've had some people that refuse. We haven't mandated that you cannot come into City Hall if you don't wear a mask. But if things start turning the corner in the negative side, there may be other things that we may have to do. So after I'm done, if you have any objections, please let me know that, from the standpoint of assuming the governor extends the statewide emergency declaration, then we would likely, I would ask that we would be permitted to extend the citywide declaration of emergency. The last thing I want to talk about to update you on, and it relates back to something Director Burns brought to the board back in May as it relates to the entertainment district. At that time, we could not find a way for certain businesses to be able to have their outdoor service center or outdoor service area without going through the entertainment provisions. It recently came to my attention that in August of this year, the Department of Finance and the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission created and issued a temporary expansion for restaurant outdoor seating provision. And that temporary expansion allows for, as long as the COVID emergency exists in the state, that restaurants that are restricted on their indoor seating could expand outside into an outdoor service area and serve alcoholic beverages within a designated, defined area that is clearly defined by temporary fencing, walls, or barriers. Now, that's subject to the city approval and subject to the state approval. But the state has changed its opinion as it relates to that. The other thing that came to my attention, and this has been one of these sort of ongoing things we've been looking at in downtown, is that the sidewalks in downtown aren't 100% within the street right of way, especially on University. I can't speak to, on Broadway. I can't speak to every street. The sidewalk, for the sake of discussion, the sidewalk is 10 feet or so, maybe a little wider. And in some areas, it's that the sidewalk immediately adjacent to the building is actually on private property, not in the street right of way. And we have been approached by one of the restaurants in downtown that has done a survey, and they found out that the first 6 feet of the sidewalk is on private property, not on public property. And they have asked to be able to expand their outdoor seating area per this waiver that the Department of Finance and Authority, Finance Administration and the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission has issued. So I wanted to at least inform the board that from my perspective, subject to the business submitting a plan that complies with this directive, I think the city will have to say yes to that because it's on private property. And I would at least ask you your feelings from the standpoint, if a business doesn't have the private property to do it, but wants to do it on public property, would you want staff to be able to do that or bring it to the board? And, well, excuse me, back up. It will have to come to the board because there's no alcohol on public property. But this new directive that I was not aware of until just recently, that came out in August, solves some of that issue that we discussed and concerns that you had as it relates to the entertainment district, because it doesn't open up for someone to be able to walk down the street with an alcoholic beverage. It only allows the business to be able to serve the alcoholic beverage in that outdoor space. And clearly, in the case of this particular business, if they have the 6 feet of space that they have, and they can set up the tables in the clearly defined area within that 6 feet of space and meet the alcohol beverage control rules and regs, I don't see how the city's gonna be able to say no. But if it's in the public space, it will have to come to the board if we get a request for that. So I wanted to update you on that because this was all new to me. I just found out about it today, actually yesterday, that this temporary expansion of restaurant outdoor seating had been issued by the Department of Finance and Administration and the ABC. So it changes the game a little bit as it relates to those private spaces. Our concern about the private space will be twofold. That there is a delineated area with rope or fencing or wall or something, and that there remains enough space on the public portion of the sidewalk that we meet ADA access. We have to maintain the ADA access space. Beyond that, that will be sort of the way we look at it, and then it will be up to the beverage control, the state beverage control, to decide whether or not they will allow that on a temporary basis, as long as the COVID emergency declaration by the governor is in existence. And I'll be happy to answer any questions on that, but I wanted to bring that to your attention because it's likely that you may see that in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, City Administrator. I guess I get to go first on the director reports. Today's been a momentous day. Tomorrow we get to wake up to see how elections have turned out. We have two of our current board members who I know are eager to see how they have fared today. I would like to encourage everyone that as we see the results that come about, whether they are definite or if we have to wait another week or 2 weeks, but we can just all maintain a level of consistency and kindness to one another, regardless of any outcome. And then we can come together as a community, as a state, as a nation, and stand stronger. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Director Burns, and we'll go from him, which means Director Hunt will finish up for us tonight.
Okay. Keep it short and sweet, and I'll yield the remainder of my time to Director Hunt. November 10th is the 245th birthday of the United States Marine Corps. And I'd like to thank my brothers and sisters that served and that provided us this free speech that we experienced tonight and the right to vote. Thank you.
Director Sappington.
Thank you, staff, for all that you've done to put up with me tonight. But if I have questions, I'm going to ask them, and I respect you all very much. I just want to know. So I also wanted to add to what Don was saying about the comprehensive plan. The 2008 is on the website, but it's called the 2030 comprehensive plan. It's kind of misleading, but it's there if anyone wants to look how things have changed in the past 12 years or which direction we're going to be going with a new comprehensive plan. And I just want to say we need to embrace our differences, and we just need to gather around our similarities. And we're more alike than you know.
Director Ressler.
I wrote about a few things. I wanted to to say congratulations to Tori Miller. Siloam Springs is very fortunate to have such a talented young lady like you call this place home. We're very proud of you. You did an amazing job on the television show The Voice, and she said Siloam Springs very clear. I'm very proud of her. Thank you to all the hard work by the members of the Heritage League. Our community will have a unique way of having a Christmas parade this year. Taken from their Facebook page, the Heritage League of Siloam Springs will host a drive-through parade on the John Brown University campus Sunday, December 6, 2020, 5:30 to 8 p.m. Downtown Siloam Springs will be having their holiday open house Sunday,